wrong with my pound?
I thought you told me to phase it out, your loveliness.
The pound note, you pillock, not the pound sterling.
Loss is made up all that.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister appreciate that she spoke for the whole country recently when she said that the poll tax had been a huge mistake?
But the right honourable gentleman is mistaken. I never said any such thing. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry to disappoint him, but he shouldn't believe everything he reads in the newspapers.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sad that the reports that there was some common sense breaking out in Downing Street appear to have been slightly exaggerated. Is the Prime Minister aware that the costs of administering poll tax are huge? Is she aware that in many areas there is chaos in the collection of poll tax? And does she appreciate that poll tax capping will inflict crippling losses, especially on children's education? When all those things are true, isn't it obvious that the only thing wrong with the saying that poll tax is a huge mistake is that it's a gross understatement?
But the right honourable gentleman never conditions his supplementary questions to my previous replies. I am not at Perhaps that is beyond his capacity to think on his feet. With regard to the collection of community charge, the right honourable gentleman and his advisers will be aware that we did accelerate the taxpayers' contribution, the rate support grant, to local authorities, so that they got virtually 3 months in place of the 2 months which otherwise they would have got, which gives them a very considerable advantage in cash terms, so that if they put it on deposit, they have a very good extra amount to tide them over any difficulties.
Perhaps the Prime Minister will condition herself to this reality, that all over the country, people under Conservative councils and Labour councils are saying this poll tax is costing us much more than the rates ever did. Where's the sense? Where's the prudence? Where's the fairness in that? Isn't it clear, Mr. Speaker, isn't it clear that such a tax is doomed and it deserves to be, along with the government that invented it?
Of course, I understand that the right honourable gentleman feels strongly about the community charge, especially as he lives in Ealing. Where, of course, having had a Labour council, they had a very high community charge. But who is the right honourable gentleman to talk? We looked at the Labour Party's document, only as we'd heard that Labour's Director of Campaigns and Communications promised on the 4th of April that the next major policy statement by the Labour Party will be on the 23rd, 24th of May, which we got. It will contain our fully worked out alternative to the poll tax. And what did we get when we found that? A list of principles, followed by this statement. The practical means by which we achieve these aims and principles are set out in a background paper. There's no background paper. The Labour Party haven't a clue.
Who never shied away from telling people about them. Norman Tebbit was a hugely influential figure in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet. A grammar school boy who trained as a pilot in the RAF before entering politics, his speech in the wake of the Brixton riots came to define him and the era.
I grew up in the 30s with an unemployed father. He didn't riot. He got on his bike and looked for work, and he kept looking till he found it.
He pushed through laws curbing him and the era.
I grew up in the 30s with an unemployed father. He didn't riot. He got on his bike and looked for work, and he kept looking till he found it.
He pushed through laws curbing. A grammar school boy who trained as a pilot in the RAF before entering politics, his speech in the wake of the Brixton riots came to define him and the era.
I grew up in the 30s with an unemployed father. He didn't riot. He got on his bike and looked for work, and he kept looking till he found it.
He pushed through laws curbing the unions and was lampooned by spitting image as Mrs. Thatcher's enforcer. In fact, he was one of the few who could say no to her.
You know, all this violence amongst unemployed British youth is the fault of a tiny minority.
Right!
Us.
Entering politics, his speech in the wake of the Brixton riots came to define him and the era.
I grew up in the 30s with an unemployed father. He didn't riot. He got on his bike and looked for work, and he kept looking till he found it.
He pushed through laws curbing the unions and was lampooned by spitting image as Mrs. Thatcher's enforcer. In fact, he was one of the few who could say no to her.
You know, all this violence amongst unemployed British youth is the fault of a tiny minority.
Right!
Us.
But in 1984, his life and future changed in an instant. When the IRA bombed the Grand Hotel in Brighton, he was badly injured and his wife Margaret left paralysed after the attack.
Mr. Tebbit, how are you feeling today?
I'm pretty fit, really. Just the odd tatty edge, which is not quite right, you know. But broadly speaking, I'm up, going, walking, and looking forward to being back in the office in the new year.
And how's Mrs. Tebbit?
she's making progress, but very slowly.
His wife's injuries so severe they prevented him returning to frontline politics in the same way. Mrs Thatcher gave him the role of party chair instead, and he was credited with delivering her a third election victory in 1987. When she was later forced out, she paid this tribute.
I had some marvellous people with me who were staunch to the end. Norman Tebbit was fabulous, so were some other people. Some junior ministers were fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
I shall be voting against the outcome of the Maastricht Conference.
Unwaveringly Eurosceptic and anti-multiculturalism, he also coined the notorious phrase about British Asians needing to pass the cricket test of whether they would support England in a match. In 1992, he stood down as an MP to devote himself to caring for his Eurosceptic and anti-multiculturalism. He also coined the notorious phrase about British Asians needing to pass the cricket test of whether they would support England in a match. In 1992, he stood down as an MP to devote himself to caring for his wife. For better or worse was the vow we made, and we kept it, he once said. Writing a children's book about a boy paralysed in an accident, he said, had helped.
Something of getting rid of some of the demons of those years. But of course they'll never be gone because my wife is still living with the consequences.
Taking up a seat in the Lords, he never resiled from his attack dog image. On the 25th anniversary of the miners' strike, defending the Conservatives' hardline stance.
If we'd had a third government brought down by trades union activity of that kind, particularly remembering that this was a strike without a national ballot, it would have put the cloth cap colonels in charge, and that was absolutely unacceptable.
The man who the Labour leader Michael Foot once described as a semi-house-trained polecat was also a devoted family man. Here's a life of public passion, unchanging views and private pain.